Warning: this episode contains details that some listeners may find disturbing. 1993, Siberia. Some kayakers are making their way down a beautiful river. Mist curls off the water, and in the distance, jagged mountains rise in a dramatic but majestic fashion. When suddenly, from the tree line, a young woman bursts out, covered in blood and screaming that her friends are dead. She can't tell anyone what killed them, just that it happened fast, and she's the only one left. Tonight we explore the harrowing 1993 Khamar-Daban Incident, sometimes called Buryatia's Dyatlov Pass, where experienced hikers left Kazakhstan for an August adventure, but 6 would die under terrifying circumstances. One survived, and her testimony only deepened the mystery. This is a study of strange. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Michael May. And hey, Halloween season is here, my favorite time of year, and while I typically cover more ghost-like, supernatural, scary stories during this season, the episode today, this fits my typical love of historical strange mysteries, but there's certain aspects to this story that, it's very subjective, but it scares me in a way that makes me think of a Halloween story. I don't know, listen to the episode and you tell me if you feel the same way. Quick note about pronunciation. There's a lot of names of people and places that I have a lot of difficulty pronouncing. Believe it or not, I do practice and research and try to get these kind of things right. But I still have a tough time. You can blame my Central Florida upbringing for that. I know I certainly do. The Khamar-Daban Range forms a jagged spine along the southern shore of Lake Baikal, the deepest freshwater lake in the world, and itself home to many mysteries and strange things. Stretching nearly 350 kilometers, these mountains straddle Russia's Buryatia region and the Selenga Highlands. Though beautiful, this is a land of extremes. Ridges can go from sun-drenched to blizzard in minutes. Weather is unpredictable because the range sits in the Baikal Rift Zone. Cold air pours off the lake, and this creates sudden rain and snow squalls even in midsummer. In July 1993, an experienced hiking instructor named Lyudmila Ivanovna Korovina assembled a group of 6 of her students from the Azimut Hiking Club in Petropavl, Kazakhstan, to go on a multi-day hike. At 41 years old, Korovina had held the Soviet title Master of Sports in Hiking and was nicknamed Master among her students. She was strict, demanding, but also deeply protective, and again I'll stress, very experienced. The students traveling with her were Tatiana Filippenko, 24 years old. She was a secretary at the local teachers' college and active club member. Alexander Krissin, a Bauman Technical University student who had hiked with Azimut since childhood and recently proposed to Korovina's daughter Natalia. Denis Shashkin, 19 years old, a stand-in replacement who joined after another student dropped out. He actually slipped off on this hike without getting parental permission. He just left his parents a note that said, "Went to mountains, back soon." Valentina Udochenko, 17 years old. She was studying to be a school tourism instructor. Victoria Zelasova, a hesitant participant, I'll call it, whose mother really wanted her to go on this hike and begged Korovina to let Victoria go. And lastly, Timur Bapanov, who was 15, the youngest of the group, and from a family of avid hikers. The instructor, Korovina, her daughter Natalia was actually leading a separate group of hikers on a tougher route, expecting to rendezvous with her mother's party near Lake Padavoy on August 5th. The hike was carefully planned, as you have to do with this type of terrain. They started at the Merino station near Lake Baikal on August 2nd, Korovina's group would climb over multiple peaks, then descend to the Snezhnaya River and finish at Sludyanka. This would take them well over 100 miles on their journey. On August 2nd, the hikers sent a telegram to rescue services just to log their departure. Almost immediately, things started going wrong. Heavy rain set in, and they spent the first night drenched and unable to dry their sleeping bags. But by August 4th, they had summited Khan Ula and reached an exposed plateau. That evening, rain turned to wet snow. They had somehow gotten ahead of schedule, but were now battling the cold winds and wet snow. And without adequate firewood on this plateau, they had a very tough time keeping warm. They planned to fight through this and descend to the Snezhnaya Valley the very next day to meet Natalia's team. But what happened next is the stuff of nightmares. According to reports, at around 10 a.m. on August 5th, 1993, the group was descending a grassy slope of the Retranslator Peak towards the Snezhnaya Valley. It was snowing and visibility was poor. Alexander Christen was lagging behind, and by the time he caught up to the group, he said he felt numb from the cold. Suddenly he collapsed. He began shaking, his eyes were bulging, blood began to pour out of his mouth, his ears, and his eyes. Korovina went to check for a pulse, but she found none. As Korovina knelt over him, she suddenly began convulsing too, and she would very quickly die of a cardiac arrest. Then Tatiana Filipinko clutched at her throat as if she was choking. She staggered over to a rock and began smashing her head against it repeatedly. Victoria Selasova and Timur Bapanov ran downhill screaming, tearing at their clothes. Both of them collapsed. Valentina Udachenko grabbed Zelasova and tried to drag her, but the girl bit her arm, and Valentina ran away. Denis Shashkin hid in his own sleeping bag, but he too began convulsing and frothing at the mouth. Within minutes, 6 people lay inert on the cold grass. Valentina Udachenko, now alone and terrified, had run to the tree line. She wrapped herself in spare clothing, and she was waiting for something to happen to her too, but it never did. The next morning, she went back up the hill, finding all of her companions exactly where they had fallen. She gathered supplies and then walked for 4 days, following power lines down the peak. To clarify, because I'm using a lot of names, so it might be hard to follow, the survivor is Valentina Udachenko, who was the 17-year-old student. For the next 4 days, Valentina followed these power lines down the mountain, and she fought to survive. She spent nights at an abandoned repeater station and on riverbanks, rationing what food she had. At one point, she reached some empty buildings, but no one was there. And when she finally reached the Snezhnaya River, she had to follow it for another day. On August 9th, exhausted and traumatized, Udachenko would finally be rescued. Coming down the river were a few Ukrainian kayakers, and as they approached Udachenko, the sight that greeted them was chilling. It was a girl screaming, waving her arms, covered in dried blood. She was crying and yelling that the people that she was with had died, and she was begging for help. The kayakers fed her, gave her antibiotics, and took her to the nearest police station. Surprisingly, an official search didn't begin immediately. While back on August 5th, when this all went down, Natalia's team was waiting at Lake Padavoy for her mother and the group of hikers. When no one came, Natalia's team packed up and they went along and finished their trek without realizing that a tragedy had occurred. It wasn't until the 24th of August, almost 3 weeks after the incident, that a coordinated search was launched. Rescue crews from all around the region went out and battled fog, rain, and confusing topography, and were having no luck. Rescue crews actually stumbled across 2 lost hikers from a different expedition. They evacuated them, and on the flight home, a crewman randomly glimpsed a patch of plastic on a slope below. Upon closer inspection, it revealed 6 bodies lying separated on a grassy incline, about 200 meters below a ridge and about 200 meters above the tree line. These were the bodies of the hikers, and the first thing rescuers noticed is that they had become partially mummified. The bodies were immediately transported for forensic examination. Pathologists were tasked with determining whether the deaths resulted from exposure, poisoning, or violence, and their findings shocked many. 5 of the hikers, Krysin, Filipinko, Shashkin, Zelasova, and Bapanov, had died of general hypothermia, and only Korovina, the master hiker, died of cardiac arrest. Analysis revealed congestion in internal organs and complete depletion of glycogen in muscles and the liver. Such changes occur in severe hypothermia and protein starvation. There were no signs of external trauma beyond insect damage and no evidence of chemical toxins. Doctors noted that continuous rain and an inability to cook may have led to malnutrition, contributing to this protein deficiency. Many people were unsatisfied with these findings. They argued that the weather, while harsh, should not have killed experienced hikers so quickly. Remember, this happened in about 3 days. And the survivor Udachenko, she shared descriptions of frothing at the mouth and bleeding and frenzied behavior that seem inconsistent with hypothermia alone. When the official answer doesn't align with what witnesses describe, theories and conspiracies flourish. Here are some of those. Hypothermia. Severe hypothermia causes confusion, hallucinations, and paradoxically, victims may feel hot and remove clothing. This could explain why several bodies were partially undressed. It might also account for Udachenko's memory of blood if victims aspirated blood while falling. Another theory is infrasound. Some rescuers, including Vladimir Borzenkov and Nikolai Fedorov, proposed that gale force winds whipping over the ridge created low-frequency infrasound waves that induce panic and irrational behavior. Studies show that infrasound can cause disorientation, hysteria, hallucinations, and even cardiac arrest. The next theory moves a bit into conspiracy land with a nerve agent exposure. Frothing at the mouth, convulsions, and bleeding are consistent with exposure to nerve agents. The Soviet Novichok series, basically poison that was developed by the Soviet Union and was used to kill some people, was tested in parts of Siberia. Rain and wind could have moved lingering toxins into the group's path, and Udachenko might have been far enough away from this to escape a lethal dose. Another theory is contaminated water or mushroom poisoning. The hikers might have drunk water contaminated by industrial dumping from Lake Baikal or accidentally foraged poisonous mushrooms. However, toxicology tests on the bodies were negative, and Udachenko has insisted that they did not forage for food. Another theory is altitude sickness or pulmonary edema. It has been suggested by more than one person that was involved with the rescue operation that the hikers suffered acute mountain sickness. Udachenko herself told a journalist in 2018 that she believed her friends died of pulmonary edema, a form of altitude-related fluid buildup in the lungs. But the elevation of roughly 2,400 meters is generally considered too low for such severe edema without pre-existing conditions. Lastly, there's a theory of a secret weapons test. Conspiracy theorists posit that the hikers stumbled upon a clandestine military experiment and were silenced. Skeptics note, however, that the Khamar-Daban region is actually a very busy tourist area, which makes it an unlikely site for secret weapons tests. Now, I mentioned in the introduction to the episode today that the survivor, Udachenko, her testimony only deepened the mystery. Why is that? Well, one of the things with stories that happen in areas of the world like this is it's remote, and reports can be misinterpreted or even embellished by local news, and then misinterpreted and mistranslated, and so on and so forth. But the fact that there's a survivor and police reports makes this feel all the more real and horrific. Adding to this mystery is that there's a difference in the reports from Russia and Kazakhstan and then European and American reports. For one, in the initial Russian reports, they talk about a specific mountain that this incident occurred on. And then in English reports, they mention an entirely different mountain, which is nowhere near the other one. Additionally, Udachenko's story has changed over time. When she first was rescued and told police about what happened, she mentioned the frothing of the mouth, the blood coming out of the mouth, the eyes and ears. And then in later years, she said that there was no blood. Amongst other inconsistencies with her stories, this adds a layer of mystique, of strangeness. However, Valentina Udachenko suffered a traumatic experience that day on the mountain, and she may have been suffering from hypothermia or malnutrition herself, meaning she likely can't remember everything as it really happened. And that is why the story gets even stranger when you talk to the sole survivor. Back in Petropavl, the hiking club and the hikers' families were devastated. Natalia Korovina had to confront the loss of her mother and 6 friends. All of this while fending off rumors that it was her mother's leadership that was to blame. In one of the rare interviews with Valentina Udachenko, she actually mentioned that Korovina cared deeply for the group and implied that she was actually a great leader. This incident mimics other mountain mysteries, like the 1959 Dyatlov Pass tragedy where 9 hikers died under very strange circumstances. Also, in 1974, there was an all-female Soviet climbing team that perished on Lenin Peak. Their last radio message read, "There are 2 of us left. In 15 to 20 minutes, we will be no more." The Khamar-Daban incident remains unsolved, and it's surrounded by conspiracies and theories just like Dyatlov Pass, even though it's less well known. But we may never know what really happened to this group, and that frightening image of a group of hikers seemingly being possessed one by one of a deadly, fast-acting unknown killer is something I'm never gonna forget. You've just listened to A Study of Strange. Consider helping us keep the lantern lit, illuminating the unexplained, by subscribing to our Substack. Just head to the support tab at astudyofstrange.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay strange.